You can't eat here. Evelyn's voice cracked across the cafeteria like a slap, loud enough that every table within 20 feet went silent. She leaned over the serving counter, face twisted, a heavy metal ladle raised and pointed like a weapon at the face of the 13-year-old girl standing frozen in front of her. Sauce ran in a dark, spreading stain down the front of the girl's white t-shirt, dripping onto her school shoes. Section B, Evelyn snapped, jabbing the ladle closer. That's where people like you eat. Not my line. Coal didn't move. She didn't cry, though her eyes burned with the effort of not crying, and she didn't run, though every instinct told her to. She simply stood there, 13 years old, humiliated in front of half the 8th grade, holding her tray with hands that had gone very still. Behind her, near the cafeteria doors, a man in a tailored navy suit stopped mid-stride, a greeting dying on his lips. That was his daughter standing in that stain. And Evelyn had absolutely no idea what she'd just started. Darius Coal had built his entire life out of nothing, and he never let himself forget it. He grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to check his homework by lamplight. He was the first in his family to go to college, funded by scholarships and a stubborn refusal to accept that the doors closed to people like him were actually locked. He studied engineering, then business, then taught himself finance from library books, because he couldn't afford the seminars other founders' kids took for granted. By 30, he'd built a logistics and technology conglomerate from a single shipping optimization patent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. By 35, he'd lost his wife to cancer and buried his grief the only way he knew how, by becoming, completely and without apology, the single most present father a little girl could ask for. Was 6 when her mother died. Darius had built boardrooms that bent to his will and negotiated deals that reshaped entire industries. But nothing had ever tested him the way one small girl's grief did, night after night, in a house that had gone suddenly, permanently quiet in one corner. He learned to braid hair from tutorial videos at 2 a.m. He learned her favorite books by heart, learned which stuffed animal had to sit on the left side of the pillow, learned to leave the hall light on, because dark hallways after her mother's passing had become something she couldn't be near. He ran an empire by day and sat cross-legged on a bedroom floor by night, and he never once let his daughter feel like she came second to either one. By the time Sarah started 8th grade at Ashcombe Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the country, a school whose new science wing existed largely because of a Coal Family Foundation grant, she had one very specific request for her father. "Don't tell them who you are," she said, the week before her first day, sitting at their kitchen island while he reviewed board documents beside her. "I don't want to be the rich girl. I don't want people being nice to me because of you, or mean to me because of you. I want to be Sarah. Just Sarah." Darius had looked at his daughter, sharp, thoughtful, 13 going on 30, and understood exactly what she was asking for, because he remembered wanting the same invisibility once, just from the opposite direction. "All right," he'd said, "just Sarah. But if anything ever goes wrong in that building, I need you to tell me. Promise me that much." She'd promised, and then, because she was 13 and proud, and didn't want to be a burden on a father who already carried so much, she'd quietly broken that promise for 6 straight weeks. It started small. Evelyn, the cafeteria's longtime manager, had a way of watching certain students that the other kids never quite registered as a pattern, because it never happened all at once. A slower scoop of rice on one tray, "we're out" of the good bread that mysteriously reappeared the moment the next student stepped up. A comment here about certain families not appreciating the meal plan they were given. Sarah noticed. She was the kind of observant that made her father's engineers nervous in meetings. But she said nothing. Not to her friends, not to the school, and certainly not to her father, because saying something felt like admitting the very thing she'd come to Ashcombe to escape, that she needed protecting, that she couldn't handle 13 the way other 13-year-olds handled it. It built for weeks, and then, on an ordinary Tuesday, it broke all at once. Had stepped up to the hotline with her tray, same as always, and Evelyn had looked at her the way she'd been looking at her for a month. Appraising, cold, already decided. "Line's closed for you," Evelyn said, loud enough to carry. "I'm right here in line, same as everyone," Sarah said quietly, holding up her student ID, the way she'd learned to hold up small, calm proof instead of raising her voice. "I've already paid for the meal plan." "Paid," Evelyn repeated, and something ugly slid into her voice. The kind of ugly that had clearly been sitting coiled for a long time waiting for permission. "You people sneak into places you don't belong. Every single day. Like little rats." She stepped around the counter, ladle raised, and before Sarah could step back, Evelyn flicked her wrist, and a thick splash of sauce arced through the air and landed square across the front of Sarah's white t-shirt, spreading fast and dark. Section B, Evelyn snapped again. That's your line. Get out of mine before you contaminate the whole counter. The cafeteria had gone dead silent, phones rising out of pockets on every side, and Sarah stood frozen in the stain and the stares, saying nothing, because there was nothing she could think to say that would make any of it smaller. That was the exact moment Darius Coal walked through the cafeteria doors. He'd come straight from a board meeting 2 floors up. The academy's leadership had spent the morning walking him through the final terms of an endowment that would fund a new arts and equity center, the largest single gift in the school's 100-year history, and he'd decided, on impulse, to surprise his daughter for lunch instead of heading straight back to the city. He was dressed sharp in navy, white shirt crisp, dark tie knotted clean, every inch the man who'd built an empire out of a 2-bedroom apartment, and he stopped mid-step just inside the doorway, a greeting already forming on his lips when he saw the stain on his daughter's shirt and the woman still looming over her with a raised ladle. Something in Darius went very quiet and very cold, the specific quiet of a man who had spent 15 years making sure nothing ever touched his daughter that he couldn't fix, standing in a room where something already had. He crossed the cafeteria without hurrying, because hurrying would have given the moment more heat than he intended it to have, and every student who noticed him coming felt the room's gravity shift a little, the way rooms do when someone walks into them, who clearly isn't afraid of anything in it. He reached his daughter, put one hand gently on her shoulder, and felt her flinch slightly before she recognized his touch, and the flinch dissolved into something closer to relief. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you all right?" "Dad." Her voice cracked on the word, 13 years of careful composure finally slipping. "I didn't want to bother you with it." "You never bother me," Darius said, low enough that it was only for her. Then he lifted his eyes to Evelyn, still standing there with the ladle in her hand and the sauce dripping from its edge, and his expression didn't change at all, which somehow made it worse than if it had. "I'd like to understand what just happened here." Evelyn had spent years running that cafeteria like her own small, uncontested kingdom, and she did not recognize, in that moment, that the ground beneath her had already begun to move. She looked at Darius, a black man in a suit, standing close to a girl she'd already decided didn't belong, and some old, ugly reflex told her exactly how to handle this. "And who are you?" she said, drawing herself up. "Coming in here disrupting my line? Parents aren't allowed back here without a visitor's badge. I'm going to need you to step outside. I have every right to be in this room," Darius said, calm, unmoved. "This is my daughter. That's her shirt, ruined. On your say-so. I'd like an explanation, and then I'd like to speak with whoever runs this facility. You threatening me?" Evelyn's voice rose, pitched now for an audience, because some part of her had already decided that the students filming with their phones would side with her, that a man like this could be painted as the aggressor faster than she could ever be painted as one. "Security!" she shouted, loud enough to carry through the double doors into the hallway. "I need security in the cafeteria, now. I've got a trespasser refusing to leave." 2 campus security officers jogged in within the minute, hands already resting near their radios, faces uncertain the moment they took in the scene. A well-dressed man standing quietly beside a stained, shaken student, and a red-faced cafeteria manager pointing at him like he was the danger in the room. "He's not supposed to be back here," Evelyn told them before either officer could ask a single question. "No badge, no authorization. He came in here shouting at me, and I want him removed from this campus immediately." Darius did not raise his voice, did not step back, did not so much as shift his weight. "I'm not shouting at anyone," he said evenly to the officers rather than to Evelyn. "I'm a guardian on this campus asking a straightforward question about why my daughter's shirt is covered in sauce, and why she was just called a slur in front of 200 of her classmates. I'd like that question answered before anyone talks about removing anybody." The younger of the 2 officers hesitated, glancing between Darius's composed, immovable posture and Evelyn's rising, red-faced fury, some instinct in him already suspecting which of the 2 people in front of him was actually telling the truth. But policy was policy, and Evelyn had gotten there first, with her voice raised, and the older officer, trained to defer to staff over unfamiliar faces, reached for a middle ground that satisfied no one. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID," he said, "and given the accusation, I'll need to check your bag." Darius looked down at the leather briefcase in his hand, the same briefcase that had, an hour earlier, held the signed endowment documents for the very arts center the board had just approved, and felt Evelyn's eyes lock onto it with sudden, greedy suspicion. as if searching him might somehow validate everything she'd already decided about him before he'd said a single word. "I'll show you my ID," Darius said. "My briefcase is not open to search without cause, and there is no cause here beyond a woman's discomfort at being questioned." That was when Evelyn made her second mistake of the day, and by far her worst one. She stepped forward, reaching directly for the briefcase in his hand, fingers closing around the handle in an open, physical attempt to take it from him. "Let's just see what's really going on here," she said, voice thin and triumphant, certain she'd found her proof. Darius did not yank the case away, did not raise his voice, did not give the room the reaction it seemed to be waiting for. He simply held the handle firm, met her eyes, and said, with total, level clarity, "You do not have consent to search my property. Not you, not security, not anyone in this building, without a warrant or documented legal cause. And a parent asking why his daughter is covered in sauce is not legal cause. I'd suggest you remove your hand." Around them, a dozen phones were already recording, capturing every second in crisp, damning detail, capturing a grown woman physically grabbing at a black father's belongings while security stood by, capturing the calm, unshaken discipline in his voice against her escalating fury, capturing, though none of the students filming it yet understood the weight of what they held, the exact moment Evelyn's small cafeteria kingdom began to collapse. She let go of the case, more from the sudden, silent pressure of 100 phone screens than from anything Darius said, but she wasn't finished. "Fine," she snapped, chest heaving. "Then get him off this campus. I don't care who he thinks he is." Darius reached into his jacket, unhurried, and pulled out his phone instead. He did not shout, he did not threaten, he simply began to type, calm as still water, while 2 security officers and a furious cafeteria manager and 200 students watched him do it, none of them yet understanding that the message forming under his thumbs was about to detonate through the entire institution. The first message went to his general counsel: freeze all disbursements tied to the Ashcombe Academy endowment account, effective immediately. Hold until further notice. The second went directly to the headmaster, a man Darius had shaken hands with not 90 minutes earlier, over a signed 9-figure gift. It was 4 words long: cafeteria. Now. 5 minutes. He slid the phone back into his pocket, looked at the security officers with the same level calm he'd carried the entire time, and said simply, "You'll want to wait before you do anything else." The 5 minutes that followed felt, to Evelyn, like an eternity she couldn't yet explain the dread of. She stood by her counter, ladle finally set down, arms crossed, telling herself she'd done nothing wrong, that the man would be escorted out and this would end the way it always ended, quietly, in her favor. She had no way of knowing that somewhere above her, in the finance office, an automated alert had just fired the moment the endowment freeze hit the system. An alert that named the account, the amount, and the donor, and landed directly on the headmaster's assistant's screen at the exact moment the headmaster himself was receiving a 4-word text that made his stomach drop through the floor. He did not walk to the cafeteria, he ran. Headmaster Wallace burst through the double doors 2 minutes and 40 seconds after Darius's text, tie askew, face the color of old paper, and the entire cafeteria, already thick with the electric tension of a scene most of the student body had been filming for 10 straight minutes, turned to watch him cross the room at something close to a sprint. "Mr. Coal," Wallace said, breathless, reaching Darius and extending a hand that shook slightly. "Sir, I am so—" "Please, whatever's happened, I assure you. Ask her who I am," Darius said quietly, nodding toward Evelyn. "She seems to have some very strong opinions about who does and doesn't belong in this cafeteria. I'd like her to hear the answer from you." Wallace turned to Evelyn, and something in his expression, a mix of fury and barely restrained panic, made her arms slowly uncross for the first time since the confrontation had started. "Evelyn," Wallace said, voice tight, "this is Darius Coal. His foundation funds this academy's entire dining services contract. His endowment, signed not 2 hours ago in my own office, is the reason we're breaking ground on the new Arts and Equity Center next spring. He is not a trespasser. He is, as of this morning, the single largest benefactor this institution has ever had." He swallowed hard. "And his daughter is Sarah Coal, an 8th grader, in this cafeteria, whom I am told you just physically assaulted with food and called—" His voice dropped, sick with the words even as he forced them out, "a racial slur, in front of 200 witnesses, several of whom appear to have recorded the entire thing." The color drained out of Evelyn's face so completely and so fast that one of the security officers instinctively reached toward her, as if she might actually fall. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and nothing came out at all. Every ounce of the small, cruel authority she'd wielded over that lunch line for years evaporated in the space of a single sentence, replaced by the dawning, horrifying understanding that the man she'd tried to have removed from the building controlled, quite literally, whether the building continued to have a cafeteria at all. I didn't know, she stammered finally, weakly, as if not knowing had ever been the point. You didn't need to know, Darius said, and for the first time his voice carried an edge, quiet but unmistakable. That's what you don't seem to understand. It shouldn't have mattered who my daughter's father is. It should have mattered that she's 13 years old, and she was standing in your lunch line with a paid meal plan, and you decided, all on your own, that she didn't belong there. You'd have done exactly the same thing to her if I were a janitor instead of a donor. The only difference today is that I happen to have the resources to make sure this doesn't happen to the next child you decide doesn't belong. He turned to Wallace. I want her removed from this campus by the end of the day. Not suspended, removed. And I want a full, independent review of every complaint filed against this cafeteria's management in the last 5 years, going back as far as your records allow. If this is the first time she's done this, I'll be very surprised. Wallace, understanding exactly how little room he had to negotiate, nodded rapidly. Of course, Mr. Coal. I'll have HR begin immediately. He did not have to wait long to be proven right about the pattern. Within 48 hours, Darius's corporate legal team, the same elite firm that handled billion-dollar acquisitions for his conglomerate, arrived on campus with subpoenas in hand, and what they found buried in years of digital cafeteria records and quietly filed, quietly dismissed parent complaints was worse than even Darius had expected. Evelyn's pattern went back 6 years. Formal complaints from at least 11 different families, nearly all of them families of color, describing almost identical behavior. Students turned away from lines, portions deliberately shorted, comments about who belonged and who didn't, all of it documented in emails that had been read, acknowledged, and filed away without consequence by an administration that had decided, again and again, that a functioning cafeteria was worth more than the dignity of the children eating in it. Security footage, once properly reviewed by forensic analysts working with Darius's legal team, showed a documented pattern stretching back years, moments the Academy's own cameras had captured and never once flagged, because nobody with the power to flag them had ever been made to look. The stain on Sarah's shirt, it turned out, mattered more than anyone in that cafeteria had understood in the moment. Forensic analysis of the footage, cross-referenced with the exact angle and force of the splash, proved not an accident, but a deliberate act, a physical assault on a minor, committed with clear intent, caught from 3 separate camera angles and a dozen student phones besides. What had started as a school disciplinary matter became, within 2 weeks, a criminal case. Evelyn, facing charges that had nothing to do with cafeteria policy and everything to do with what she'd actually done to a child in front of witnesses. The video Sarah's classmates had filmed reached well beyond Ashcombe's gates. Clips of the confrontation, Evelyn's raised ladle, the stain spreading across a 13-year-old's shirt, Darius's unshaken calm as he refused an illegal search, spread across every platform within days. And the story that emerged wasn't really about Darius Coal's wealth at all, though headlines loved that detail. It was about how easily an institution could look away from years of quiet cruelty until the one time it happened to a child whose father simply couldn't be ignored, and about how many children without a father like that had likely endured the exact same thing, unrecorded, unheard, filed away in an inbox nobody ever opened. The Academy's board, facing a public relations catastrophe layered on top of a genuine legal crisis, moved fast. 2 senior administrators who'd received and buried prior complaints were dismissed alongside Evelyn. A new equity oversight office was established, reporting directly to the board rather than to the dining services management, with an anonymous reporting line that Darius's foundation funded and staffed with outside investigators. Precisely so, no future complaint could simply be filed away by whoever it was inconvenient for. Evelyn herself, once the pattern in the records became public alongside the criminal charge, disappeared from any conversation about second chances. The case moved through the courts exactly as any assault against a child should have, without the quiet institutional cover that had protected her for 6 long years. Sarah, for her part, had spent the 2 weeks after the confrontation deeply unsure how she felt about any of it. Part of her was proud of her father, of watching him stay so still and so unshakable in a moment designed to make him look exactly like what Evelyn had wanted the room to see. Part of her grieved the version of 8th grade she'd wanted, the quiet, invisible, purely earned version where nobody knew her name meant anything beyond her own effort. That version was gone now, replaced by something she hadn't asked for. classmates who knew exactly who her father was, teachers who watched her a little differently. A story that would follow her, at least for a while, wherever she went next. But something else had replaced that loss, something she hadn't expected. In the weeks that followed, 3 different students, 2 of them younger, one a shy 9th grader she'd never spoken to, approached her quietly, separately, to say some version of the same thing. That happened to me too, and nobody believed me until it happened to you. Sarah realized, slowly, that her father's presence in that cafeteria hadn't just fixed what had happened to her. It had cracked open a door that had been quietly, deliberately shut on other kids for years. Kids who hadn't had anyone able to freeze an account or summon a headmaster in 5 minutes flat. Darius, watching his daughter process all of this over the weeks that followed, made a decision that had nothing to do with lawyers or endowments. He didn't simply write another check and walk away, the way he'd always assumed, until that Tuesday. That money alone could keep his daughter safe. He started showing up. Not surprise visits meant to catch problems after the fact, but regular ones. Lunch with Sarah every other Friday. No advance notice to administration. No fanfare. Just a father sitting across from his daughter in a cafeteria that was, slowly and deliberately, becoming a different place than it had been. The new dining hall management, hired under the equity office's oversight, ran the lines differently. No favoritism, no targeting, portions measured the same for every student, regardless of who was standing in front of the counter. The anonymous reporting system logged its first real complaint within a month, and it was handled, investigated, and resolved within a week. A turnaround that would have been unthinkable under the old regime. Darius funded a scholarship in his late wife's name for students who needed it, quietly, without his name attached to the announcement, because some things, he'd decided, didn't need his signature to matter. On a bright Friday afternoon, nearly 2 months after the day Evelyn had raised a ladle at his daughter's face, Darius walked into the Ashcombe cafeteria in a suit far less formal than the one he'd worn that first terrible day, and found Sarah already saving him a seat by the window, tray set, sauce nowhere near her shirt, laughing at something a friend across the table had said. He sat down across from her, and for a while neither of them talked about anything important at all. Just school, just a friend's upcoming birthday, just ordinary 13-year-old things that Sarah had once been so desperate to have without anyone watching. "You okay?" Darius asked eventually, quiet, just between them. Sarah looked around the cafeteria, at the new manager checking in gently with a younger student in line, at the equity office's small posted notice by the door, at the whole room that had changed shape because her father had refused to let one bad afternoon simply be filed away and forgotten. "Yeah," she said, and meant it. "I think I actually am." Darius reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, the same gesture he'd used every night since she was 6 years old, the one that had never once needed explaining between them. Outside the window, the spring light came in warm across the tables, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was thinking about boardrooms or lawsuits or headlines at all. They were just a father and his daughter, sharing lunch by a window, exactly the way it should have been all along. And that's the whole story. One ladle, one stained shirt, and a father who refused to let a single ugly afternoon disappear into a filing cabinet. If watching that headmaster sprint across the cafeteria gave you the same chills it gave me writing it, do me a kindness and hit subscribe so you're here for the next one. And I want to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and your country in the comments below. I read every single one, and there's nothing I'd love more than to send you back a personal hello and see just how far this story travels by morning.